My sister told 200 guests I was fixated on her husband. Can you even imagine the betrayal? My own sister, the one I thought I was finally close to, used her wedding day to publicly humiliate me, accusing me of something so vile, so twisted, it made my blood run cold. But what he did next, in front of everyone, made her entire world collapse. Growing up, my sister Valerie and I were never really close. She was always the golden child, the pretty one, the one who effortlessly got the bigger room and all the attention. I was just the younger sister, usually trailing behind. When I turned 22, I packed my bags and moved 3 states away for a job. Honestly, that distance, that space, did more for our relationship than anything else ever had. We started texting, actually talking, and for the first time in my life, I truly believed we were becoming the sisters I'd always dreamed of having. Then she met Drew. Now, here's where things get complicated. Drew was a guy I'd been on exactly 2 awkward coffee dates with back in college. We had zero chemistry, zero spark, and we mutually ghosted each other, barely remembering each other's names afterward. So, when Valerie excitedly told me she was dating a Drew and showed me his picture, I just laughed. I told her, straight up, about our failed attempt at romance years ago. The phone line went silent. I quickly assured her it meant nothing, that I barely remembered him, and she seemed to accept it. 8 months later, they were engaged. And Valerie asked me to be her maid of honor. I was genuinely touched. I took time off work, flew home for every single event, spent way too much money on her bachelorette party, and I did it all happily. Because I really thought this was it. We were finally becoming real sisters. A month before the wedding, Valerie called me, sobbing. One of her bridesmaids had dropped out due to a family emergency, and now the numbers were uneven. She asked if my best friend, Ka, could fill in last minute. Ka, being the incredible person she is, agreed without hesitation. Valerie sounded so grateful. She told me she was doing a champagne and gold color scheme and sent Ka a link to the exact dress she wanted her to wear. Ka ordered it immediately. The week of the wedding, I flew home and stayed at my parents' house. Valerie was stressed, snippy, but I just chalked it up to wedding nerves. The morning of the ceremony, all the bridesmaids met at the venue to get ready. I walked in with Ka and felt my stomach drop instantly. Every single bridesmaid was wearing a deep, rich burgundy dress. Every single one, except Ka, who stood there in champagne gold, looking completely out of place. Like she'd walked into the wrong wedding entirely. Then, Valerie emerged from the bridal suite in her robe. The look on her face, it was pure satisfaction. She gasped, loud enough for everyone to hear, and turned to her new maid of honor, her college roommate, who had mysteriously replaced me 2 weeks prior. No explanation given. I knew we would try something, Valerie hissed. She's been jealous of me and Drew since the beginning. My head snapped up. What are you talking about? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She ignored me, spinning around to face the room. She told everyone that I had been obsessed with Drew for years, that I had tried to break them up multiple times, and that she suspected I had deliberately put Ka in the wrong dress to cause drama on her big day. I stood there, frozen, disbelief warring with a sudden, scorching anger. Then Ka, bless her heart, calmly pulled out her phone. She held it up, showing everyone the text thread with Valerie. The link to the champagne dress, Valerie's message saying, "This is perfect. Order it ASAP." The room went completely, utterly silent. Valerie's face twisted into a grotesque mask of rage. She started screaming that I must have faked the text somehow, that I was always jealous of her, that I wanted her life. Her college roommate tried to calm her, but Valerie shoved her away. Then she pointed directly at me. "She probably slept with Drew," she shrieked. "This is all part of her plan." That's when Drew walked in. He'd heard the screaming from the hallway where the groomsmen were getting ready. He looked at Valerie, then at me, then back at her, his expression a mix of confusion and pure horror. "What in God's name is going on?" he demanded. Valerie ran to him, tears streaming, clinging to him. "She's trying to ruin everything. She's always been in love with you." Drew gently but firmly pushed her back. He looked directly into her eyes. His voice was tired, resigned. Valerie, I have told you 100 times. Nothing ever happened between us. We went on 2 bad dates 5 years ago, and I am getting really tired of you constantly bringing it up. Then he continued, his voice rising, gaining a powerful, cutting edge. You made me block her on social media. You went through my phone weekly, looking for messages from her. You even accused me of thinking about her during intimate moments. The room was dead silent again. You could hear a pin drop. Valerie started crying harder, a broken, desperate sound. I just love you so much, she wailed. I was so scared of losing you. Drew took a step back from her. His gaze was fixed on her, but it was hollow, empty. I can't do this anymore, he said, his voice quiet but devastating. I ignored the red flags for too long because I thought you would calm down after the wedding. I'm sorry, Valerie, but I can't marry someone who trusts me this little. He turned, walked out, and didn't look back. Valerie collapsed onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Her bridesmaids just stood around, looking absolutely helpless. I grabbed Ka's hand. We turned and walked out, leaving the chaos behind us. We drove to a diner, the kind with sticky booths and endless coffee, and ordered pancakes. I sat there in my burgundy bridesmaid dress, eating breakfast at 10 in the morning on what was supposed to be my sister's wedding day. My phone blew up for hours, calls from my parents, from Valerie, from relatives demanding to know what happened. I just turned it off, ordered more coffee, and tried to process the absolute whirlwind of an hour I'd just lived through. 3 months later, I heard through my mom that Valerie had started therapy. Then last week I got a text from her. She asked to meet for lunch. She said she had something important to tell me about Drew. Something I deserved to know from the beginning. I just stared at that text, reading it for the 10th time, until the words started to blur. Something important to tell you about Drew. Something you deserve to know from the beginning. My stomach twisted into knots. What could she possibly reveal now that would actually matter? Drew walked out of that wedding 3 months ago. I honestly thought that was the end of it. I put my phone down on the kitchen counter, only to pick it up 30 seconds later, rereading the message. The words didn't change. I grabbed my phone, pulled up Ka's number, and pressed call before I could talk myself out of it. She answered on the second ring, and I didn't even say hello before launching into it, telling her about Valerie's message and how my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Ka's response was immediate and firm. Absolutely not, she said. You are not meeting her alone. This could be another setup, another manipulation. We talked for 20 minutes, going in circles about whether I should even respond. Finally, we agreed. If I decided to do this, she was coming with me as backup. I thanked her, hung up, and spent the rest of the evening staring at my phone, trying to figure out what Valerie could possibly need to tell me. I slept terribly that night, waking up every few hours to check if Valerie had sent another message. She hadn't. The next day at work dragged on forever. I could barely focus on the spreadsheets in front of me. My brain kept spinning through possibilities. That evening, I texted Ka again and we talked through it one more time. She reminded me that I didn't owe Valerie anything, that I could just ignore the message and move on with my life. But something about the way Valerie had worded it, that deserved to know from the beginning part, made me think maybe this was actually important. After 2 days of agonizing speculation, I finally texted Valerie back. I told her I'd meet her for lunch at a neutral location, a cafe called Riverside, halfway between my parents' house and my apartment. And I added that I was bringing Ka. She could take it or leave it. I hit send before I could second-guess myself, then immediately wanted to throw my phone across the room. My phone buzzed less than 5 minutes later with Valerie's response. She agreed to my terms, no argument, no pushback. I stared at her message in complete shock. The old Valerie, the one from before the wedding disaster, would have absolutely demanded it be just the two of us, so she could control the conversation. This quick agreement to let Ka come, it made me nervous in a completely different way. Like, maybe Valerie had actually changed. Or maybe this was some new kind of manipulation I hadn't figured out yet. I forwarded the text thread to Ka. She responded with 3 question marks. Clearly just as surprised as I was. We agreed to meet at my apartment an hour before lunch, so we could drive over together. The morning of the lunch, I woke up feeling like I might actually throw up. I tried to eat breakfast, but could only manage half a piece of toast before my stomach rebelled. Ka showed up at my door right on time, took one look at my face, and pulled me into a hug. She told me we could still cancel, that we could get in her car right now and drive to the beach instead, forget this whole thing. But I shook my head, grabbed my jacket. I needed to know what Valerie wanted to tell me, even if it was going to mess me up all over again. Ka drove because my hands were shaking too much to be safe behind the wheel. She kept up a steady stream of conversation during the 20-minute drive, talking about her job, her annoying coworker, anything except the lunch we were heading toward. Every few minutes, she'd remind me, "We can leave anytime, Ree. You're in control of this situation." We arrived at Riverside Cafe 15 minutes early and grabbed a table in the back corner where I could see the door. I ordered a coffee I didn't drink and Ka got a tea she didn't touch either. We sat there in tense silence, watching every person who walked through the door. When Valerie finally walked in, right at noon, I barely recognized her. She'd lost at least 15 pounds since the wedding, maybe more. She looked utterly exhausted. Her face was thinner, her clothes hung loose on her frame, and there were dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. She spotted us immediately and walked over slowly, like she wasn't sure if we were going to get up and leave. She sat down in the empty chair across from me, without ordering anything. Her hands were shaking as she folded them on the table in front of her. She opened her mouth twice before any words came out, and when they did, her voice was shaking almost as badly as her hands. She apologized for everything that happened at the wedding, for the accusations, for the dress setup, for the complete nightmare she put me through. She told me her therapist, Madison, had been helping her understand that she had an obsessive jealousy problem that completely destroyed her relationship with Drew and damaged our relationship. I sat there without saying anything, just listening, trying to process the fact that my sister was actually taking responsibility for her actions. Valerie kept talking, explaining that Drew had actually told her about our 2 college dates on their second date together. She'd been paranoid about it ever since. She admitted that she'd made him block me on social media, that she'd checked his phone constantly, looking for messages from me, that she'd accused him of thinking about me during their most private moments. Her voice cracked when she talked about how she drove him away with her constant suspicion and accusations. Then the dress setup. It wasn't a last-minute panic or wedding day stress. It was a planned sabotage. She'd been working on it for weeks. She wanted to prove to everyone, especially to Drew, that I was trying to ruin her wedding. She thought if she could make me look bad in front of all those people, Drew would finally see that I was the real problem in their relationship, not her jealousy. She actually believed that humiliating me would somehow fix everything between them. Valerie started crying now, real tears streaming down her face. I felt Ka squeeze my hand under the table, hard enough that it almost hurt. I took a deep breath and asked Valerie the question that had been burning in my mind since I got her text. "Why are you telling me all this now?" I asked, my voice rough. "And what is the important information about Drew? Because so far, you haven't told me anything I didn't already know, or couldn't have guessed." Valerie took a deep breath, wiping her eyes with a napkin that was already falling apart in her hands. She told me that Drew had actually tried multiple times to invite me to hang out with them as a couple. He wanted to prove there was nothing between us. Wanted to show her that we could all be normal together. But every single time he suggested it, she refused and accused him of wanting to cheat. She'd scream at him for hours after he brought it up, telling him he was trying to humiliate her by forcing her to watch him flirt with me. Drew would try to explain that wasn't his intention at all, that he just wanted her to see how platonic our history was, but she couldn't hear it. She was so deep in her jealousy that any mention of my name sent her into a panic. She shifted in her seat, talking faster now, like she needed to get it all out before she lost her nerve. She revealed that Drew had suggested couples therapy 6 months before the wedding. He was worried about her jealousy and thought a professional could help them work through it together. But Valerie refused. She told him he was the one with the problem for not understanding her feelings. She actually convinced herself that his suggestion of therapy meant he was planning to leave her for me. In her mind, Therapy was just his way of preparing her for the breakup, so he wouldn't feel guilty when he ran off with me. She admits now that this made no sense, but at the time, it felt completely real and logical to her. Drew tried to explain that therapy would help them both, that it wasn't about blame, but she shut down every conversation about it. The waitress came by to refill our water glasses, and Valerie stopped talking until she walked away. Then she looked directly at me. "The important information," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "is that Drew never had any romantic feelings for you whatsoever. Not even a tiny bit." She said her therapist helped her realize she invented an entire story in her head that had no basis in reality. Drew never looked at me in any special way, never mentioned me except when she brought me up, never gave her any actual reason to think he wanted me. She created this whole fantasy where I was secretly in love with him, and he was secretly in love with me, and she was the only one who could see the truth. I sat there, completely stunned. Not by the revelation, but by the lack of one. I thought she was going to reveal some actual secret, something scandalous. But this was just her confirming what I already knew, what everyone at that wedding already knew. I finally found my voice. "Valerie," I said, a dry laugh escaping, "I could have told you that myself. I was there for those 2 awkward coffee dates where we talked about economics homework and realized we had nothing in common. I barely remembered him when you first showed me his picture. I had to think for a minute to even place who he was." Valerie nodded, fresh tears welling. "I know that now," she whispered. "But I spent years building up this fantasy, where you were secretly in love with Drew and trying to steal him from me." She even convinced herself that I moved 3 states away specifically to make Drew miss me. In her mind, my job opportunity and my desire for independence didn't matter. Everything I did was part of some elaborate plan to make Drew realize he wanted me instead of her. She'd lie awake at night, imagining scenarios where Drew would suddenly remember our coffee dates and realize I was his soulmate. She said her therapist has helped her understand that she was projecting her own insecurities onto me and Drew, creating a villain in her story, so she didn't have to face her real fears about not being good enough. Ka finally spoke up, her voice sharp in a way I rarely hear from her. "Why did you replace Kira as maid of honor 2 weeks before the wedding?" The question hung in the air. I realized I'd almost forgotten about that specific, calculated detail. Valerie looked down at the table, her face going red with shame. She admitted she was afraid Kira would defend me when she executed her dress sabotage plan. Kira had been her college roommate and knew both of us pretty well. Valerie was worried Kira would speak up and ruin the whole setup. So, she made up some story about needing someone who understood her vision better and demoted Kira to regular bridesmaid status. Kira was hurt and confused, Valerie said, but accepted it because she didn't want to cause drama before the wedding. Anger rose in my chest then, hot and stinging, like a container filling with boiling water. This wasn't a moment of wedding day panic or stress-induced paranoia. Valerie had been planning to humiliate me for weeks, maybe months. She had carefully orchestrated the dress colors, the timing, the setup with Ka, all of it. She had replaced her maid of honor specifically to make sure no one would defend me when she made her accusations in front of everyone. Every single detail was calculated and cruel, designed to make me look like the villain in her made-up story. I thought about all those phone calls leading up to the wedding where she sounded so grateful for my help, so happy that we were getting closer as sisters. All of that was fake. All of it, while she was planning this elaborate trap. Valerie reached across the table, trying to take my hand, but I instinctively pulled it away before she could touch me. She started crying harder, the tears running down her face faster than she could wipe them away. She said she understood if I never forgave her, that she wouldn't forgive herself if she were in my position, but she needed me to know the truth about how sick her thinking had become. Her therapist, Madison, had been helping her understand that she needs to take full responsibility for her actions, not just apologize and expect everything to be okay. She knew she destroyed our relationship, and she destroyed her relationship with Drew, and it was all because of problems that existed only in her head. "Have you been in contact with Drew at all since the wedding?" I asked, my voice cold, even to my own ears. Valerie shook her head, more tears falling onto the table between us. She said Drew blocked her number the same day he walked out. She found out through a mutual friend that he moved to a different city about a month later. She didn't blame him for wanting nothing to do with her. She said she put him through hell for their entire relationship, accusing him of things he never did, controlling who he could talk to, checking his phone like a detective, looking for evidence of a crime that never happened. She admitted that walking out of that wedding was probably the best decision he ever made, even though it destroyed her at the time. Ka spoke up again, asking the question I was too angry to voice myself. She wanted to know if Valerie had apologized to Drew for what she put him through. Valerie wiped her face with her sleeve and nodded slowly. She said she wrote him a letter through her therapist about a month ago. Madison helped her write something that took responsibility without making excuses or asking for anything in return. She sent it to his new address, but she had no idea if he ever read it. She said she hoped he did, because he deserved to know that none of it was his fault, that he did nothing wrong. But she wasn't expecting or wanting a response. She just needed him to know that she understood now how badly she treated him. I pushed my chair back from the table and stood up, my legs feeling shaky after sitting through Valerie's confession. I told her I needed time to process everything she'd told me. I wasn't ready to say I forgave her or that we could rebuild our relationship. The words came out flat and tired because I'd been holding them in for the past hour while she cried and explained her therapy breakthroughs. Valerie nodded, wiping her face with a napkin that was already soaked through. She said she expected that, but she hoped someday I might be willing to try. Her voice cracked on the last word, and part of me wanted to comfort her. But a bigger part remembered standing in that bridal suite while she accused me of sleeping with Drew in front of everyone. Ka stood up next to me, putting her hand on my shoulder, a silent reminder that we were leaving now. As we were getting up, Valerie mentioned that she'd also apologized to Ka for setting her up with the wrong dress. She looked at Ka with red, swollen eyes and said she knew it didn't fix anything, but she wanted Ka to know she was sorry. Ka accepted the apology, but told Valerie it was going to take more than sorry to fix what she did to both of us. Her tone was polite, but cold, and I was so grateful she was there. I don't think I could have handled this conversation alone. We walked out of the cafe into bright afternoon sunlight that felt utterly wrong for how heavy everything felt. On the drive home, Ka and I sat in silence for 20 minutes before I finally broke down crying. The tears came suddenly, and I couldn't stop them. Big, ugly sobs that made my whole body shake. Ka pulled over into a gas station parking lot and just sat with me while I cried into my hands. I wasn't even sure if I was crying from anger, relief, or grief for the sister relationship I thought we were building. Maybe it was all three, mixed together into something I didn't have words for. Ka didn't try to make me stop or tell me it was going to be okay. She just handed me tissues from the glove box and waited until I could breathe normally again. When I finally calmed down enough to talk, I told her I didn't know what to do with all this information. Knowing that Valerie planned everything, that she deliberately set up that dress situation to humiliate me, it made it worse somehow. Ka just said we didn't have to figure it out right now. We could just go home, watch bad TV, and eat ice cream. That sounded perfect. So I nodded, and she pulled back onto the road. That evening, my mom called, asking how the lunch went because Valerie had told her we met. I gave her a brief summary while sitting on my couch with a pint of chocolate ice cream. Mom listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she let out a long sigh. She admitted she and Dad had been worried about Valerie's mental health for years, but didn't know how to address it. This surprised me because my parents never talked about Valerie having problems when we were growing up. Mom said they noticed things but hoped she would outgrow them, which clearly didn't happen. Asked her what kind of things they noticed, and there was a long pause before she answered. Mom revealed that Valerie had similar jealousy issues with her high school boyfriend, accusing his female friends of trying to steal him. She would call him constantly to check where he was and who he was with. They thought she'd grown out of it, but clearly the problems went deeper than they realized. I sat there, holding my phone, wondering how I never knew any of this. Mom said they didn't want to label Valerie or make her feel bad about herself, so they just encouraged the boyfriend to be patient with her. He eventually broke up with her anyway because the jealousy was too much. I told Mom I wish someone had warned Drew about this pattern before he got engaged to her. Mom's voice got quiet, and she said they thought about it, but didn't want to interfere in Valerie's relationship. She sounded guilty now, like she was realizing they should have said something. We talked for another 15 minutes before I told her I needed to go. After we hung up, I sat in the dark, thinking about how many people saw warning signs and said nothing. 2 weeks after the lunch, I got a text from Blake Goodman, Drew's best friend from the wedding. I recognized his name from the guest list and remembered seeing him standing with the groomsmen that morning. He asked if we could talk because Drew wanted to reach out to me, but wasn't sure if it would be appropriate. My first thought was, this is weird, but then I remembered Drew was a victim in all of this, too. I texted back, sure, we can talk. Blake suggested meeting for coffee the next day at a place near my apartment. I agreed. The next afternoon, I walked into a small coffee shop and found Blake already sitting at a corner table. He was tall, with dark hair, and looked tired, like he hadn't been sleeping well. We shook hands, and I sat down across from him. Blake explained that Drew felt terrible that I got caught up in Valerie's accusations and wanted to apologize for not defending me more strongly that day. He said Drew had been beating himself up about it for months, replaying that morning over and over. I told Blake that Drew didn't owe me an apology because he was dealing with his own crisis in that moment. Blake nodded, but said Drew still wanted me to know he wished he had handled things differently. He pulled out his phone and showed me a text from Drew that basically said the same thing. Blake told me that Drew had actually been planning to call off the wedding the week before, but his parents convinced him to try one more time. They told him every couple has problems and marriage would make things better. Drew knew that was wrong, but he loved Valerie and wanted to believe she would change. Blake said Drew regrets not trusting his instincts and walking away sooner. He thinks if he had ended things privately before the wedding, I wouldn't have been dragged into the mess. I appreciated that Drew was thinking about me, but I told Blake that Valerie would have found another way to blame me for the breakup. Her problems weren't really about me or Drew. They were about whatever was going on in her own head. I asked Blake if Drew knew about the dress setup plan. Blake's eyes widened. Absolutely not, he said. Drew was genuinely shocked when he walked into that room and heard what Valerie was saying about me. Blake said Drew had no idea Valerie had sent Ka the wrong dress color on purpose. He thought it was an honest mistake until he saw how satisfied Valerie looked when she started making accusations. That's when everything clicked for him. He realized how far gone she really was. Blake leaned back in his chair, a sigh escaping. Drew spent the whole morning getting ready, thinking about how to bring up his concerns about the relationship one more time. He never imagined he'd walk in on a planned attack. I believed Blake. Drew's face that morning showed real confusion and horror. Blake gave me Drew's new number and said Drew would like to apologize directly if I was open to it. He wrote it down on a napkin and slid it across the table. I took the number, but told Blake part of me wanted to talk to Drew and clear the air, but another part thought it might be better to just let everything stay in the past. Blake said he understood and told me to take my time. We finished our coffee and talked about other things for a while, just normal conversation about work and life. It was nice to have a casual chat that wasn't about wedding drama or family problems. When we left the coffee shop, Blake gave me a quick hug and said he hoped I was doing okay. I told him I was working on it, which felt like the most honest answer I could give. I spent the next month throwing myself into work, taking on extra projects that kept my brain too busy to spiral. Ka checked in on me every few days, and one Friday she showed up at my apartment with 2 packed bags and announced we were going to the beach for the weekend. I didn't argue. I knew she was right. I needed to get away from everything. We drove 3 hours to a small beach town and rented a cheap motel room that smelled like salt water and old carpet. We spent Saturday walking along the shore, and Ka let me talk through everything that happened without interrupting or trying to fix it. I told her how weird it felt that my sister's mental health crisis became the defining moment of my year. How I was angry at Valerie, but also sad for her. How I didn't know if I'd ever trust her again, even if she got better. Ka listened and nodded, occasionally throwing shells into the waves. Sunday morning, we sat on the beach, eating donuts and watching the sunrise, and I realized this was the first time in weeks that my chest didn't feel tight. When we drove home that afternoon, I felt like maybe I could actually move forward instead of just surviving. The next week, I was sitting at my desk, staring at Drew's number that Blake had given me. I'd picked up my phone a dozen times and put it back down because I didn't know what I'd even say to him. But then I thought about how he walked out of that wedding and probably spent months dealing with his own mess. And maybe we both deserved to clear the air. I sent him a text that just said, "It's me," and asked if he wanted to talk sometime. He responded within an hour, saying yes, and gave me his new number, since he'd changed it after everything happened. We set up a time for Thursday evening, and I spent the next 3 days being nervous about a phone call with someone I barely knew. When Thursday came, I almost canceled 5 times, but at 7 o'clock I dialed his number, and he picked up on the second ring. The first few minutes were so awkward that I considered faking bad reception and hanging up. But then Drew said he'd been wanting to apologize to me for months. And suddenly, the conversation got easier. He told me he felt terrible that I got dragged into Valerie's accusations, that he should have defended me more strongly in that moment instead of just defending himself. I could hear genuine guilt in his voice, and it made me feel less alone in this whole situation. Drew started explaining how he'd ignored so many red flags because Valerie was perfect in every other way. He said she was loving and supportive and funny. And he convinced himself that her jealousy was just insecurity that would fade once they got married, and she felt more secure in the relationship. He thought if he just proved his loyalty enough times, blocked me on social media like she asked, let her check his phone whenever she wanted, that eventually she'd trust him. He admitted now that he was wrong to think marriage would fix her problems, and he wished he'd recognized the patterns earlier. I listened to him talk about checking in with her constantly when he was out with friends, about avoiding female coworkers because it upset her, about the time she accused him of thinking about me during sex, and he actually tried to convince her that wasn't true, instead of recognizing how messed up the accusation was. He sounded exhausted just recounting it all, and I started to understand that he was drowning in that relationship long before the wedding day. I told Drew he didn't owe me an apology because he was dealing with his own crisis that morning, and I didn't blame him for how he reacted. I explained that I was just collateral damage in Valerie's issues, but he was the actual target of all that jealousy and control. We ended up talking for over an hour, and I realized he was actually a really decent person who got caught in a bad situation with someone he loved. He told me about the guilt he felt leaving Valerie sobbing on the floor, how his parents were furious with him for embarrassing the family, how half their mutual friends took her side because they couldn't believe sweet Valerie would do something so calculated. He moved to a new city 2 months after the wedding disaster because he couldn't handle running into people who knew them as a couple. I found myself feeling protective of him, even though we were basically strangers, because I knew what it was like to be blamed for Valerie's problems. Drew mentioned he started therapy right after the wedding, working through his own trust issues and learning to spot unhealthy relationship patterns before they get that bad. His therapist helped him understand that he'd been in a controlling relationship and didn't even realize it because Valerie's control came wrapped in love and concern. He said walking out of that wedding was the hardest thing he'd ever done, but also the best decision because staying would have destroyed him eventually. I heard real conviction in his voice when he talked about it, like he'd finally accepted that leaving was the right choice, even though it felt awful. He asked how I was doing with everything, and I was honest that I was still processing it all, still deciding if I wanted to rebuild a relationship with Valerie or just let it go. Drew didn't give me advice, but he listened. Really listened. And that felt more valuable than any advice could be. We ended the call agreeing to stay in touch as friends, which felt strange, considering he was my sister's ex, and we went on 2 terrible dates years ago. But it also felt healthy and honest. There's something freeing about talking to someone who understands exactly what Valerie's jealousy looks like from the inside. After we hung up, I sat on my couch for a while, thinking about how weird life is. How the wedding disaster connected me to someone I never would have known otherwise. I saved his new number in my phone under just Drew. No last name, no context, just a person who gets it. 3 months passed, and I was getting coffee before work when my phone buzzed with a text from Valerie. She was asking if I'd be willing to meet again, saying she'd made real progress in therapy and wanted to share some things she'd learned about herself. I stared at the message while my coffee got cold, trying to figure out how I felt about seeing her again. Part of me wanted to ignore it and keep living my life without her drama, but another part was curious about what she wanted to say. I texted Ka, asking what she thought, and Ka said I should do whatever felt right for me, that she'd support either decision. I spent 2 days thinking about it before I finally responded to Valerie, saying yes, I'd meet her. But this time, I wanted to do it alone, without Ka there. I needed to know if Valerie and I could have a real conversation without a buffer. We agreed to meet at the same cafe where we'd had lunch before. And when I walked in, Valerie was already there at a corner table. She looked different. Healthier, somehow, like she'd been sleeping through the night and eating regular meals. Her hair was pulled back, and she was wearing minimal makeup, weren't rational jealousy. They were a symptom of OCD that made her brain get stuck on fears of abandonment and betrayal. She was on medication now and learning coping strategies in therapy, and she said it was like someone turned down the volume on the constant anxious noise in her head. Valerie started explaining that her jealousy was never really about me or Drew specifically. It was about this deep terror of being abandoned that came from our childhood. She talked about how we were always compared to each other. How she felt like she had to be perfect to be loved because any flaw meant I would be chosen over her. She said she internalized this idea that love was conditional and could be stolen away if someone better came along. So, she tried to control everything to prevent that from happening. I sat there listening, and realizing that while I spent our childhood feeling invisible next to her, she spent it feeling like she was one mistake away from losing everything. We both grew up in the same house but experienced completely different versions of our family, and neither of us knew what the other was truly going through. I took a breath and told Valerie that I needed to share something, too. That growing up, I always felt like I was in her shadow. She looked confused, so I explained how I was just the younger sister who wasn't as pretty or accomplished. How I felt invisible next to her. Valerie's face changed. She said she had no idea I felt that way, that she always thought I had it easier because there was less pressure on me. We sat there for a long time, talking about our childhood in a way we never had before. Both of us realizing we spent years misunderstanding each other's experience. She told me about feeling like she had to be perfect or she'd lose our parents' love. And I told her about feeling like nothing I did mattered because she'd already done it better. It was the first truly honest conversation we'd ever had about being sisters. When we were getting ready to leave the cafe, Valerie asked if there was anything she could do to make up for everything beyond just saying sorry. I thought about it for a minute and told her the most important thing was that she keep going to therapy and working on her mental health, not just for me but for herself. She nodded and said, Madison had been helping her understand that her problems went deeper than just the wedding situation. We walked out to the parking lot together and stood by our cars for a few minutes, just talking about normal things like work and the weather. Before we drove away, Valerie suggested that maybe we could try rebuilding our relationship slowly, like meeting for coffee once a month, where we could practice talking to each other. Honestly. I agreed, and told her there was no pressure to become best friends overnight. We were just committing to try. She looked relieved and gave me a quick hug before getting in her car. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in months. Like, maybe there's a chance for us after all. A few days later, I was at my parents' house for Sunday dinner when my uncle Otto pulled me aside in the kitchen. He told me he was proud of me for being willing to give Valerie another chance while still keeping healthy boundaries. Otto has always been the wise one in our family, the person everyone goes to for advice about relationships and life problems. He said what I was doing was what real forgiveness looked like, that it's not about pretending nothing happened, but about choosing to move forward anyway. I told him I was scared Valerie might fall back into old patterns. And he reminded me that's why the boundaries matter, that I can support her growth without letting her hurt me again. We rejoined everyone in the dining room, and I noticed my parents watching Valerie and me interact with this hopeful look on their faces. Like they were afraid to believe things might actually get better between us. 6 months pass, and I get invited to a small family dinner at my parents' house. When I arrive, Valerie is already there, helping Mom set the table. We say hi to each other and fall into easy conversation about a TV show we both watch. It's not perfect, and there are still some awkward moments, but it feels genuine in a way our relationship never did before. We all sit down to eat, and Dad asks Valerie about her new job, and she talks about it without the fake enthusiasm she used to have when trying to prove everything was perfect. Later, when we're clearing dishes, Mom pulls me into the hallway and says she's so relieved to see Valerie and me talking and laughing together. I can tell she was worried we'd never speak again after the wedding disaster. Throughout the evening, I catch myself actually enjoying Valerie's company, not forcing it or pretending, but genuinely finding her funny and interesting. When I'm leaving, Valerie walks me to my car and tells me she started volunteering with a mental health advocacy group. She explains that she's been sharing her story at their meetings to help other people recognize obsessive relationship patterns before they destroy their lives. I'm surprised and impressed that she's turned her worst moment into something meaningful, that she's using what happened to help others. She says Madison encouraged her to find a way to give back, and this felt right. I tell her I think that's really brave, and she smiles in a way that looks different from her old smile, more real, somehow. A week later, I'm at work when my phone buzzes with a text from Drew. I haven't heard from him in months, so I'm curious what he wants. The message says he started dating someone new, and it's going really well, that he wanted to thank me for being a supportive friend during his healing process. I text back saying I'm genuinely happy for him and asking how he's been. He calls me during my lunch break, and we talk for 20 minutes about his life and his new girlfriend. He sounds lighter, like he's finally moved past everything that happened with Valerie. I tell him about Valerie's progress in therapy and the volunteer work she's doing. And he says he's glad she's getting help, but he's not ready to have any contact with her yet. I understand completely and tell him he doesn't owe her anything. Before we hang up, he says he hopes Valerie and I can build something healthy together, that sisters are important. After the call, I sit in my car thinking about how strange it is that Drew and I are friends now, when we barely knew each other before all this happened. The wedding disaster connected us in this weird way. Both of U.S. victims of Valerie's obsession. That evening, I'm making dinner in my apartment when I start thinking about everything that's happened over the past year. The wedding disaster was one of the most painful experiences of my life. Watching my sister accuse me in front of all those people and then seeing her relationship fall apart. But it also taught me important lessons about boundaries and forgiveness, and the difference between enabling someone and supporting their growth. I learned that you can't fix someone else's mental health problems by ignoring them or making excuses for their behavior. I learned that real love means being honest, even when it's hard, and that sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let someone face the consequences of their actions. Valerie and I will never have a perfect sister relationship like the ones you see in movies. But we're building something real and honest. We're learning to talk to each other without the layers of resentment and competition that defined our childhood. It's slow and sometimes awkward, but it feels worth it. A year after the wedding that never happened, Valerie texts, asking if I want to take a weekend trip together. Just the two of us, no parents or other family members. A chance to spend real time together. I'm nervous about it, but I agree, figuring if things get weird, I can always drive home early. We book a spa weekend at a resort 2 hours away and drive up on a Friday afternoon. The first few hours are a little stiff as we settle into the hotel room and figure out how to be around each other for an extended period. But by dinner that night, we're talking easily, sharing stories about work and friends and the random things happening in our lives. On Saturday, we get massages and sit in the hot tub, and Valerie opens up about her therapy sessions in a way she hasn't before. She talks about the work she's doing to understand her fear of abandonment and how it shaped her behavior in relationships. I share my own struggles with feeling invisible and how moving away helped me build my own identity, separate from being Valerie's little sister. We spend hours by the pool, talking about our hopes for the future and our commitment to breaking the unhealthy family patterns we grew up with. Valerie admits she's scared about dating again because she doesn't trust herself to recognize when she's falling into obsessive patterns. I tell her that's what therapy is for, to help her develop those skills. On Sunday morning, before we check out, we sit on the balcony drinking coffee and watching the sunrise. Valerie thanks me for giving her another chance, and I tell her I'm glad I did, that I can see how hard she's working to change. As I drive home Sunday afternoon, my car full of spa products, and my body relaxed from the weekend, I feel genuinely optimistic about our future as sisters. We've both grown so much over the past year, doing the hard work of understanding ourselves and each other. The wedding day was traumatic, and I wouldn't wish that experience on anyone, but it forced us both to confront truths we'd been avoiding our whole lives. Valerie had to face her mental health issues and get real help instead of pretending everything was fine. I had to learn how to set boundaries and stop making myself small to avoid conflict. Sometimes the worst moments in life lead to the most important growth, and I'm grateful we both had the courage to do the hard work of healing. Our relationship will always have scars from what happened, but those scars are part of our story now. They remind us how far we've come and how much we've learned. I turn up the music and roll down the windows, feeling the warm air rush through the car. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever had a moment where everything you thought you knew about someone just shattered? Tell me what you think in the comments. I really want to hear your stories.